Kind of. All right, we are live. Hey guys, good morning, good morning, good morning. It's always great to connect and hang out with you. I am hanging out with Drew Tarvin today. Andrew Tarvin, officially, what they call him Drew. I don't know why. But, he's an engineer, man, but not just any engineer. He's a humor engineer. Yeah, you heard that right. He's a humor engineer. He helps people to have fun and to enjoy work, be more productive, and to have fun at work. Now, if there's anything that is worth engineering, it would be that fun at work, right? In addition to that, he's an author. Has written a couple of bestsellers. He is a speaker. He gets to spend time sharing his wit. I'm not sure if that is even correct, but yeah, we're going to find out if he's witty in a minute. With Fortune 500 companies around the world, he's appeared, in several magazines, Forbes, Inc., and on several podcasts. And today, he gets to appear and keep on pushing. He gets to hang out with me, man. So, life is getting good for one of us. I'm not sure. But Drew, it's great to have you here, man. How are you?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I am doing well. It's Friday. So yeah, no, I'm feeling good.
Hey, so you ready for some fun at work?
I am. Here's my guarantee that I give to any event that I'm speaking at, any podcast that I'm doing. My guarantee is that I am going to have a good time. Right. Usually that translates to other people having some fun, but I know for sure I will have a good time.
You know what? As long as you're having fun, hey, unlucky for the rest of us, right? It's responsibilities on you to have some fun. By the way, guys, if those of you who are tuning in, and we are live here on LinkedIn, and we're on Facebook and YouTube, dude. So we're all over the world. Feel free to comment, man. Ask questions, and we'll be happy to engage you there. So, I guess talk to me, man. What is a humor engineer?
So a humor engineer is my made up job title for what I do. And some people consider it an oxymoron because when you hear engineer, you don't immediately think, comedic genius or anything like that. Not that I'm a comedic genius, but you don't think necessarily laughter. But it's really what I do because my background is in computer science and engineering. And as a computer science engineer, I would solve workplace problems using computers and technology, right? And now as a humor engineer, I solve workplace challenges using humor. So instead of, spreadsheets and things like that, it's more about, okay, how do we improve employee engagement, or how do we reduce stress, or how do we communicate our message more effectively? And it turns out that humor is really effective with these things called humans. And so I use it as a way to be effective with people.
How did you arrive at that conclusion? Was it their engineering genius?
Oh, I wish. No, I was pushed into improv and stand-up in university. And so my best friend wanted to start an improv comedy group. He needed people and forced me to join. And I'll admit, when we first started, I was not very good. I was, awkward and shy and not very quick or anything like that. But over time, with a lot of practice and repetition, got better. And the more I started to do improv and stand up, the more I started to bring it into my own work and see that it was really helpful.
Interesting. I'm going to follow up on that point in a minute. But it sounds like you're saying that you are actually a trained engineer. How did you... So you made that transition to humor because you got co-opted into this improv group? Is that how this journey started?
Yeah, so that was the initial stages of it. So in university, right, I'm getting a degree in computer science and engineering. My friend wants to start this group, so we start to do that. And then after I graduated, I started working at Procter & Gamble as an IT project manager. And the kind of initial moment for me of starting to bring humor was, I remember pretty early on in my career at P&G being in this meeting that was like incredibly boring. Like, I don't know if you've been in one of those meetings where you almost like want to cry because of how boring it is.
Yeah.
And the problem with this particular meeting was that I was the one leading the meeting.
Oh, wow. So were you crying?
I was basically on the verge of tears, like while I was like speaking about how boring and dry this thing was. And I realized, like if I'm bored while talking, everyone in that room has to be bored while listening.
Yeah.
And so I was talking with that same friend that kind of pushed me into to stand up, and I was worried. I was like, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe like, is the corporate career like really what I want to do? I thought it was, but like, is this the rest of my life? Am I going to spend the next 40 years of my life in these boring meetings and always wish I had done something else or whatever? And he was like, well, why don't you treat it like a problem? You love solving problems. Like I do Sudoku on my own. I love crossword puzzles. I don't think of them as math problems so much as like math opportunities. Like I love solving problems. And so he's like, why don't you think of it as a problem? And I was like, okay, how would I solve the problem of boredom in a meeting? And I had just recently learned that Alfred Hitchcock is in pretty much every single one of his films, like as a silhouette or a stranger passing by. And I was like, okay, what if I just put a picture of me in every single one of my presentations? What if I include a picture of me as a kid, or a picture of me doing a hobby that I love, or kind of something in the background? And it made the presentations more fun for me to give. People started to like catch up, like pick up on it, and like they would get excited for it. And so it just really changed the entire dynamic. And that was really the initial start of like, okay, let me bring what I've learned from humor and bring it into what I'm doing for work. And the combination of those two things just happens to work really well.
Yeah. So you mentioned an interesting term. I'm going to say problems versus opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Is that your advice? How we should approach challenges in our lives generally, not to look at them as mountains per se, but an opportunity, something else.
I mean, I think so. Like, I think that, and this I learned from improvisation, because the fundamental mindset of improv is something called yes and it's how improvisers make things up off the top of our head and make it seem like it makes sense. Because like if you and I were doing an improv scene and you step out and you're like, oh my God, look at that dog over there, and I'm like, oh, that's not a dog, it's just a rock. Right now, you and I do an improv scene where we're arguing with each other about something that doesn't exist. Versus if you step out and you're like, oh my God, there's a dog over there. I'm like, yes, and there's a monkey riding on it. Right now, you and I are in this scene where there's monkey riding a dog for whatever reason, what that means to us as people, and we're building together. Yeah. And so that yes and mentality is similar, because so often we're in a yes but mentality. We're like, but what about this thing? But this isn't right, or whatever, right? That's more of like seeing things as problems, like, oh, this isn't great because of this thing. Whereas a yes and mentality is like, okay, well, I can't change the past. I can't change what you've offered up as a suggestion in a scene, or I can't change the fact that I am now working in an IT project management job at P&G when that was happening. But I can change the future, right? I can yes and that into a new opportunity. And it's very much with your kind of mentality of keep on pushing. It's leveraging what you've already done to create an even better future.
Yeah. Great that you brought that up, because I was going to ask, now that you have transitioned into speaking and we're in the middle of a COVID pandemic, how have you pivoted what you have been doing previously, and certainly what you've done in the university as an engineer, into what you're doing now?
Yeah. So for the last, so I left P&G in 2012. So for the last 8 years, full time, it's primarily been a lot of in-person speaking, a lot of in-person events. So we've delivered over 600 events, I think, in all 50 U.S. states and 30 countries and 6 continents. Prior to like 2020 was probably going to be one of my busiest travel years. Was going to spend like a 3-week tour in Europe, going to different places speaking. We're just going to try to hit pretty much all the continents if I could. So obviously all of that changed. So we pretty quickly pivoted to virtual, because I think one of the things that we realized and a lot of other people realized was that humor is even more important, I think, now, because so many interactions with our coworkers are transactional at this point. Right? When it's just a Zoom meeting and you're hopping in and you're running late from another one and you got another one that you go to, it's so often just like, hey, I need that thing from you. Okay, got it. Okay, boom. And now we're out. And so we don't have that same human connection that we used to when we would see people in the hallway, or we would stand next to them in the elevator, or we chat in the lunchroom or at the water cooler. And so we recognize that we need to bring that levity back because stress is also a lot higher. A lot of change has happened. How can we relieve that stress with humor? So we've done virtual stand-up shows, virtual improv classes, virtual writing workshops. Our trainings have switched to virtual. We've done a lot of virtual keynotes where we bring that message of humor. We still get people laughing. We did this yesterday on a Zoom call with a group they're trying to do a fiscal year in celebration, and normally they would get together. And they can't do that right now. So we had, we did some comedy, we did some interactive stuff. So we're doing basically what we did, the same message, but now delivered in an engaging virtual way that still is going to make people laugh, still going to make people smile.
Yeah. And I assume that in terms of the equipment and so on that you use, your engineering background has come in handy.
Absolutely, yeah. So we one of the things that we created was this hierarchy of virtual events, because when people think of a virtual event, a lot of times they think of that terrible webinar thing where people are just reading to you, or you think of the presenters that are bad. You think of like the people that are like out of view a little bit, or people that are like the opposite way where they're just doing kind of the Batman look at you or whatever, or they're like muted. Like they think of all the terrible stuff that happens in Zoom, and like, no, that like it can actually be really engaging. You can have like that picture-in-picture view right next to you. You can have videos that are seamlessly used. And so, yeah, we picked up on some technology right away to really make it an engaging experience where it's almost like a customized, episode of Last Week Tonight or Seth Meyers or whatever he used to kind of sing that way, where it is engaged with not only funny, but also presenting valuable content to the group, but in a way that's not going to make you want to cry.
So as you so wisely alluded to, this whole idea of keep on pushing, you get to use your knowledge and skills and experience from a previous life, so to speak, to take advantage of a new environment, to create new opportunities for yourself. And that's what all of us have the opportunity to do as well, if we see our situations not as problems, but as an opportunity to something better.
Absolutely.
So Drew, let's talk about humor at work, man, because you're engineering that, and usually when people think of work, they're thinking in terms of focus and being serious and commitment and dedication, not fun, not humor. How do you jive and gel how do you use your engineering genius to gel all of that together?
Yeah, well, there's tons of research that shows that humor is helpful for increasing productivity, for reducing stress, improving communication, etc. But the simplified version of this is, and this is a dumb question, which you can answer, but the dumb question is, would you rather do something that is fun or not fun?
Well, is it hard or is it easy?
Right, that's a good question. Good follow-up question.
Because I have a screw missing, right? If it's not hard, then it's not fun.
Right? Yeah.
I love all of us love to do something fun.
Exactly, right? You would love to do something fun. So that means that if you were to make your, virtual meetings a little bit more fun, people would probably be more willing to come to them. If you're to make your emails a little bit more fun, people would be more likely to read them. If you were to make your own work a little bit more fun, you'd probably be a little bit more engaged in it. And that's what the research shows, is that when we can add a little bit of humor to the work that we do, we get better results. So it's not about this idea of like becoming a corporate clown or becoming so funny that people are like, oh, you should do stand-up comedy. That's not the goal. The goal is to be more effective. And so, there's multiple ways to kind of do that. But, one of the questions in the chat is like, how do you keep people's attention? Right? How do you do that in a virtual meeting? Well, you can use humor as a great way to do that. For example, starting with the story, right? We as humans are natural storytellers. And if you start your virtual presentation with a story that's connected to your topic, right? That's a key. It shouldn't just be a funny story that then has no relation to what you're talking about. But if it's connected to your topic, then people will be leaning in when they hear that story. Or if you use more visuals, right? So if you're going to have a PowerPoint deck that you need to share, use use images in there. Share a picture of you as a kid to kind of help people relate to you a little bit more, or share a funny meme that you see online, or a funny chalkboard sign that you saw. Like in a presentation that I gave earlier this week, I was sharing an example, and I had walked by this sign outside a coffee shop that said, "Life is a lot like chess. I don't know how to play chess." Right? I think that's a pretty funny line. It's a picture that I took, and now I can include that in my sign. Because the other thing to kind of like, people are like, but what if I'm not funny? What if I'm not a comedian? To use humor in the workplace, you don't have to be the humor creator always. Sometimes you can be a humor curator, right? You can find something else that someone else has created, give them credit, but then share it as well. And now you're just opening or creating the space for humor without necessarily needing to be the funny one.
But you also mentioned something earlier, which I said I was going to get back to. You use the word skill. You were suggesting that humor, being funny, is a skill. And what we know about skills are there are things you learn and you practice and develop them. And maybe initially you suck, but you can get good at it. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know that is true because I am someone who has had to learn how to use humor, because, you know, I've done over 1,000 shows as a stand-up comedian, improviser, storyteller, spoken word artist. There's reason to suggest that I'm maybe funny. My TEDx talk on the skill of humor has over 7 million views. People have paid me to travel around the world to talk about humor. People have laughed in audiences. I've seen laughter in the virtual programs and things that we've done. So there's reasons to believe that I'm funny. But I went to my high school reunion a few years ago when people found out that I did comedy. They're like, "But you're not funny." Yeah. And so I'm not the stereotypical funny person. I'm not the person that you'd say, "Oh, he's naturally funny."
Right. So you weren't the guy who was, getting huge audiences at school.
Nope. Yeah. No, when I was the awkward one. In fact, my kind of foray initially into humor in like junior high school was I was weird and kind of awkward and very nerdy. And a good friend of mine who I knew since the second grade, he had gotten more popular. And so he introduced me to his group of friends. And even then I was a little bit awkward. And so he would say a joke. He just wouldn't say it very loud. So then I would just repeat his joke. Everyone would laugh. And then that like helped me get into the group. But it wasn't even me being funny. It was just repeating what he had said.
Yeah, well, like I said, you're a curator of jokes, right?
Exactly. Got to be a curator. Got to be somewhat of a performer. And so, yeah, absolutely. It is something that can be learned. And I think the other thing to recognize is that there are different styles of humor. Some people are much better as an improviser. They're maybe really funny in conversation and they're good with their friends, but they're not as good if they're going to like write down a joke that they have to deliver over and over again. Some people are really good actors where they're like, okay, maybe I don't have the comedic idea, but if you give me kind of what to say, I can deliver it. Some people are really good at writing, right? Maybe they're not. Maybe they get nervous performing in front of other people, but they're really good at sharing it on social media or in an email or that kind of thing. My brother is really good at drawing. So he's a professor. And so when he's teaching things like the rhetoric, the history of Western thought and rhetoric and the history of Western thought, not a particularly, exciting topic to begin with. Yeah, he uses cartoon drawings that he draws to demonstrate what he's talking about. And so it's less about being that like ideal version of, say, a stand-up comedian, but leveraging your kind of natural humor style and then over time learning how to improve it.
Yeah, awesome. By the way, Tara King, thank you so much for your question. And Drew, I'm sure, the advice that you shared with her in terms of how to keep people's attention in a virtual meeting applies to a real live meeting as well, correct?
It does, for sure. The difference is, so to geek out just a little bit, there is a study of various rhythms in the body called chronobiology. And chronobiology suggests there's certain rhythms that we have. There's an attention rhythm, or what we oftentimes think of as an attention span. And for adults, it ranges between 5 to 20 minutes of attention for something that we are voluntarily doing, if it's the same. The interesting difference between an in-person event and a virtual event is that a virtual event is always voluntary, right? Because if you're at an in-person event and you go and you don't like what the person is talking about, or you're in that meeting, it's hard to leave, right?
Yeah.
Because it's very obvious if you just like get out, like I'm too bored, I'm gonna go. Versus a virtual meeting, it is so easy to just stop your video and like walk away or to alt tab to something else, right? So it's always a voluntary activity when it's virtual. And so what we say is in-person meetings, we suggest some type of humor or pattern interrupt every 10 minutes. This could be a story that you tell or an interactive exercise that the people do, or a couple of jokes that you share, or just an interesting visual, or any of those types of things. In a virtual meeting, we suggest that happen every 5 minutes, because people are so used to stuff moving on their screens. If it's just you talking for a long period of time without some type of engaging content, people are going to click away. So we suggest every 5 minutes a story or something fun, not necessarily funny, but something fun.
Gotcha. So, but Joe, so we're talking about work, and I get that if you are having fun at work, you're more productive, you're more engaged in what you're doing. But isn't there a risk involved in bringing humor to the workplace?
There absolutely is a risk. And that's one of the differences between, say, humor in a performance setting and humor in the workplace. Because in a performance setting, the difficulty is that the bar for being humorous is so much higher. Because people are going to a comedy club and they paid money and they have a babysitter and they have a 2-drink minimum, etc. They're expecting you to be really funny.
Yeah.
Right. Versus you in the boardroom, or you in your meeting a little bit later today, no one is expecting you to be as funny as Chris Rock. And so the bar is much lower for it to be fun and engaging. However, the risk is much higher. In a comedy club setting, if you say something that is offensive to someone, most often it's just a person doesn't like you and they're not going to come and see you again. Versus the risk in a corporate setting is maybe you get fired, maybe you lose a customer, maybe you have a lawsuit. And so this is why it's really important to make sure that for humor in the workplace, again, your goal isn't to be super funny. It's to be effective. And the way to be more effective is positive, inclusive humor. Is to make sure that it's less about kind of punching down. It's less about the sarcasm or satire, and it's more about kind of uplifting people or doing more positive, kind of inclusive things. Or if you are going to poke fun at something, you kind of poke fun at yourself. But keeping within those parameters typically works better, because you're absolutely right. There is some risk, but there's also so much reward if you do it well.
Yeah. So you're saying it's better to have self-deprecating humor in the workplace as opposed to always be poking fun at John or Jane.
Yep, exactly. Yep, yeah, it's much better. Like, so when I'm speaking to groups, because self-deprecating humor is great when you're in a high status position. So for some groups, I talk about how frail I am. Like I am a skinny person. I was born 8.3 pounds and then stayed that way till I was 15 years old.
You're on 8.6 now?
Yeah, exactly. I've boosted up to 8 point after much working out. I'm at 8.6 now.
Keep on pushing, baby.
Exactly. Got to keep on pushing. Got to yeah. But it's like having kind of a being able to joke a little bit about that, to let people know that I don't take myself too seriously. Like I am obsessed with efficiency. I listen to podcasts at 2x speed, because not only is it more efficient, but then also more people sound like me. Like I know I got a little bit of a nasally voice, right? Can poke fun at that. Those types of things. That's much safer than me trying to make fun of someone else. And then even besides that, there's all other types of humor. You might like a positive story or an interesting story isn't going to be aggressive to anyone. It's more of a self-enhancing humor. It's more enhancing the situation. Or you can do a team building activity. Another way to keep people's attention in virtual meetings is to have them do things via the chat. You can have simple questions like, okay, so how are people feeling about today's work environment on a scale of 1 to 5? Or what's the, you can do the scavenger hunt thing where people are like, okay, find something around you that has meaning to you. What is there? What's the most interesting thing that you can grab? Like, okay, I've got headphones here that I think, these headphones, like, orange is my favorite color. Now I'm getting to know you a little bit better.
Right.
What is this? This is a remote to a VR headset. I'm a nerd, so it's like I like technology and stuff, play with it, right? So you can just grab stuff around you and then bring people in. So interactive activities are a great positive, inclusive form of humor you can use.
So guys, of course, we are hanging out with Drew Tarvin, the humor engineer. Feel free to post your comments or ask questions. We're here to help you, man. Help you find some humor at work so you can be more productive. have fun, and here's a bonus: live longer, right?
Yes, that's
Live
right.
longer, baby. So Drew, how do we how how can we determine when a joke, like humor, is appropriate for work, or
Mhm.
maybe we should be nixing this idea?
Yeah, I think that so the way that we think about humor is as a tool, right? It can be a solution to some challenges. So when you're thinking about when you're experiencing some type of difficulty at work, you can one of your first questions can be, can humor help me to solve it?
Hmm.
Right. So for example, if you're like, okay, I have this problem of people are not reading my email, right? Yeah, maybe you're sending, maybe your brand, you're sending out a humor newsletter or a marketing campaign newsletter, and you're like, okay, people aren't reading my emails. Can humor help me to do that? Absolutely. Okay. Based on that, what are some ways that humor could help? Oh, well, maybe we can start to add a little bit of humor in the subject line, right? What if we change the subject line to include the first part of a joke and the second part of the joke is out in the email? Or what if we did song parodies, like song lyric parodies based on the subject of the email and changed it there? Or what if we just added a little bit of incongruity? Maybe that helps.
Hmm.
Or one of the things that I did at P&G was I would add at the end of every like long email, like I would send out these weekly status reports. I would add at the end of them a pun based on the subject matter because I love puns. I love writing them, and I was never sure how much people read it. And then one day I came into work after having sent out an email, and I had a ton of emails in my inbox. And I was slightly worried. I was like, did I say something offensive? Was I wrong about something? What's going on? And I had forgotten to add a pun at the end of the email. And so I had all these emails that was like, wait, where was a joke at the end of the email? Or I missed the jokes. You're still doing the jokes, right? I was expecting a joke. Like all these people who were like, no, I'm so used to this framework. And
Right.
what I didn't realize I was doing, but by having it there each time, it was almost kind of like a small reward for people to read my email. So when it came into their inbox, they would prioritize my email over a bunch of others because they knew by the time they got to the end of it, they would be rewarded for it with some humor.
Exactly. So you're rewarding them for reading your email.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, but so I'm thinking back, and when we spoke last time, I shared an experience with you. I guess
Mm-hmm.
when I was a young officer cadet at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst in England, learning to become an army officer. We had it's called a regimental dinner. It's a very
Mm-hmm.
formal affair, and I was seated next to the commandant, who was a colonel. I'm not even an officer yet,
Mm-hmm.
and we were having good conversation, and he told me about his when he was stationed in the Falkland Islands. There was
Mm-hmm.
a big war between England and Argentina over this group of
Mm-hmm.
islands, Falkland Islands or Malvinas. So the UK, England won the war, and so he was
Mm-hmm.
stationed there, and his wife came to visit. Now there's this huge wildlife, lots of birds down there,
Mm-hmm.
and she was a bird watcher.
Mm-hmm.
And in the UK, a guy would call his girlfriend a bird, and I guess maybe guys call their wives birds as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sat there for half the night wanting to make a joke. I wanted to say, it's really interesting that your bird is interested in birds. And, I just like, I kept going back and forth. I'm like, I'm not sure if this will go over well with the colonel, being
Mm-hmm.
an officer cadet. And eventually I did not uh,
Mm-hmm.
say that to him. And I think that's probably why I became an officer. So I think when I think of the work environment, Joe, I think that I think our gut will
Mm-hmm.
tell us as well whether or not our attempt at humor is appropriate or not.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think that yeah, that gut check. I think the way that we kind of frame it is what we call the newspaper rule. And if what you're about to say and or do, like if you would be uncomfortable with it showing up on the front page of the hometown newspaper, right, for everyone to read, or for everyone in the company to read, or for every, your friends and family to read, or your parakeet to read, or whatever, if it's on the newspaper, and you're like, I don't know if I'd want everyone to see that, then it's probably not appropriate for the workplace.
Yeah, that's true. So as we wrap up here, what top two, three pieces of advice you'd have for anyone who may be an introvert, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily, but wants to bring some light and some fun, not just to their work environment to impact everyone else and have
Mhm.
better results and higher levels of productivity, but just, I mean, just for their own sanity as they go through the
Yeah.
journey of work.
Yeah, so that would be kind of three things that come to mind. The first is first start with if you're a little bit hesitant or more introverted or less of a performer, that kind of thing. Start first with yourself. Find ways that you can incorporate humor for your own benefit, especially for things like releasing or managing stress. Right? We live in a pretty stressful environment. And there's certain things that you can't control, but you can control your reaction after those things happen. So, for example, if you have a meeting every week with this one person and it's always a tough meeting and you're always stressed out afterwards, can you schedule 10 minutes right after that to do something that's going to make you laugh so you relieve some of the stress that you've built up?
Mm,
Maybe it's like, okay, that's 10 minutes that I'm then going to go and watch some funny YouTube clips, or I'm going to watch cat videos, or I'm going to call my friend who's really funny, who makes me laugh. Whatever it is, can you plan for those kind of moments so that you can manage stress yourself? So that's, I think, a great starting point because it doesn't impact other people. There's very low risk because you're unlikely to offend yourself.
right.
So it's a good place to start.
If you're offending yourself, you're in a bad spot.
Yes, you're in a bad. There's some disconnect that's going on there. So that's number one. Number two is I would say keep a humor notebook. So one of the things that when we work with groups and we're teaching them how to build their skill of humor, the first thing that we encourage people to do is create a humor notebook. So this is either a physical notebook or it could be, the notes app on your phone, or Evernote is what I use. But create
Mhm.
one place that whenever something really funny happens to you, or you have a funny idea, you have like, that's kind of really interesting, write it down in that notebook, because it'll do two things. One, if later you want to create some humor, if you're like, hey, I have this presentation, I want to use some humor based on some things that have happened, it gives you a spot to go back to so you don't have to come up with something from scratch, but you can be like, oh yeah, this crazy thing happened to me. This client said the funniest thing like 3 days ago. Maybe I can now bring that in and share that, right? So it gives you a repository to go back to. And then the second thing that it does is you start to notice more humor around you. Because I don't think that funny things happen to funny people. I think funny people see the things that happen to them in a
Right.
funny way,
Hmm.
right? So changes your perspective. And you like start, oh, I actually laugh quite a bit at work, or oh, that's a great moment to hold. So it changes that perspective. And then the last thing that I would say is to simply, what we encourage people to do is to drive 1 mile per hour. Trying to think about like what's one thing that you can do each hour of the day that brings a smile to either to your face or the face of someone else. So if you're like, okay, I'm getting ready to go into this hour-long virtual meeting, what's at least one thing that I can do that's going to make people smile on it? Okay, I have I have to work on, I need to process email for an hour. What's one thing that I can do while processing email that's going to make me smile? Maybe it's like listening to the Hamilton soundtrack or the new Beyonce album or whatever, right? So it's like
Hmm.
doing these things to kind of just each hour of the day. And what that will do is it'll help you develop a humor habit. You'll start to notice the opportunity for humor around you a lot more. And you'll get started. Of course, if people want to learn what we're up to, they can. You can find a open mic in your area, or take a virtual improv class, or we offer some of those things as well to get practice if you want. But starting with those three things, I think, is a great starting point.
Three great points. I really love the piece on perspective, though,
Mm-hmm.
and looking for um, humor, because I think it's has such a much broader application in our lives in terms of success. It's the things that when you change your perspective on what's happening around you
Mm-hmm.
and look for the good or the funny, the humor, you start to see more of it, right?
Yeah.
So that's a really good advice, and definitely building that skill, driving 1 smile per hour. And because there are so many stories as well, not just about work, but people who may be dealing with a terminal illness and how they're in a
Mm-hmm.
hospital bed watching comedy and
Yep.
just laughing every day, and how that has been really therapeutic. So,
Absolutely.
dude, really, really good information, man. I think it's, all of us need to lighten up a little bit and, bring a little humor, a little fun to
Yeah.
our, I don't want to say drudgery, but work can feel like that at times. So Thank you so much. Hey, if someone wants to find you, man, uh, for you to share your wit with them virtually now and obviously in person when all of this
Mhm.
craziness ends, how do they find you?
Yeah, so we have a our website is Andrew or sorry, is humorthatworks.com. And yeah, so we have a bunch of free resources there that we have blog posts, we have um information about our book, information. We right now we're doing some virtual free open mics if you have a story that you want to come and kind of workshop and we give feedback on it. We have a free kind of virtual improv dropper in every other Sunday as an opportunity for people to kind of practice from the comfort of their own home, those things. And then, yeah, of course, we also offer workshops, trainings, that kind of stuff. So I can find that there. If you have questions specifically for me or want to connect with me, or if you love puns, most of my social media is puns and one-liners and jokes and stuff like that. You can follow me at Drew Tarvin on all social media, whether that's Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, etc. I'm more than happy to connect with folks.
Awesome. So at Drew Tarvin and humor.works.com, that's where you
Mhm.
find the humor engineer, folks. Uh, Thank you, all of you, for tuning in. If you love this, if you find it useful, um, feel free to share it, man. Share it with your friends. Make sure you follow Drew at drewtarvin.com. I'm at Keep On Pushing 88. So press that like button and press that share button. And as always, keep on being funny, Drew. And for all you out there, keep on pushing.